day. This is Ivor Davis, the author of The Beatles and Me on Tour, an exciting cliff-hanging adventure of my travels with the Beatles, the lads from Liverpool, which took place 50 years ago this summer. Talking to Rabbi Sol Solomon of Dave's Gone By, UNC Radio.
Hello, hello. I don't know why you say goodbye. I say hello, hello, shalom. Is this Ivor Davis?
This is Ivor Davis, Rabbi, and it is such a pleasure to talk to you as we are coming up to the new year and to the Day of Atonement. But as we all know, most people have very little to atone for.
Oh, well, I have quite a lot to atone for, but I'm tone deaf, so that makes it pretty much impossible.
Then you should probably get another job, if I may offer that suggestion.
I can't get another job. That's why I'm a rabbi.
I understand.
I have my own congregation. I'm the founder and spiritual leader of Temple Sons of Bitches in Great Neck, New York. And I am very thrilled, as you hear, everybody, to be talking with Ivor Davis, the English journalist, the man who was sent by his newspaper, the London Daily Express, to cover day by day by day the 1964 Beatles tour. And he stayed with them, and now he's written about it in an entire book called The Beatles and Me on Tour. He also wrote a book about, you should know from it, the Manson killings. He's working on some other things. But right now, Ivor Davis is here with us in the Daverhood. It's actually the Davis Hood. My first question for you, Mr. Davis, is, what is your Hebrew name?
Yitzchak Yankov Ben Usha.
Yitzchak.
That is the actual way it's pronounced. It may be pronounced differently in Colorado, but, you know, they do things differently in Colorado.
Oh, they do everything differently. But let me ask you a question, though. Here, you have this name, Ivor Davis, very English-sounding name. In America, we have all these people, Jews, changing their name from Shmokolovich and Cohen and da-da-da, because at Ellis Island, they had to. How did you wind up with Ivor Davis?
Well, my father actually came from Poland, and his name was Davitsky. And after a few days in England, he found it impossible to make them understand his last name. So he looked in the telephone book and found Davis, and that's how I was born. And that's the true story.
Well, that's not actually how you were born. You were born when your father and your mother went to a hotel and did some things.
Yeah, but we don't talk about that, because in those days you never talked about going to hotels. You just did it.
Indeed. Or you went to a motel, because they were cheaper. Yeah.
They were much cheaper then, yes.
Much. Anywho, so tell us, I mean, you probably told the story a million times, but since you're writing this book now, first of all, how did you get into journalism to begin with?
Well, there were two things. Number one, when I was a young boy growing up in the East End of London, which was predominantly Jewish, by the way, in case you didn't know that,
yes!
I always wanted to be a policeman or a detective. But unfortunately, I was small. And most of our family that came from Poland were small.
Most Jews are small, compared to black people. But you mean height-wise? Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Height-wise. Yeah, we weren't dwarfs, but we were pretty close. And so what actually happened was they said, there's no way, Davis, you're going to get into the police force at your height. So choose another career. So I thought long and hard, and I chose to be a journalist where you can still ask people rude questions and not get punched in the eye for it.
Well, actually, some journalists do get the occasion. Have you ever been slugged by anybody?
No, not really. I've been walked out on. Several people have left the room when I asked a question.
Ooh, anybody famous?
Well, a lot of famous people, if I ask them how old they are, and they don't want to tell me, they say, none of your goddamn business, and they're gone, you know.
So you don't ask that as your first question. You save that one to the end.
Do not ask that as your first question of a celebrity of an uncertain age, yes.
And usually their publicists or the materials have something, well, now, this is in the days before Google, where you can just look up on Wikipedia that so-and-so is 115 years old.
You can. You could do, and you couldn't do back in the time that the Beatles came to America. They did not have Wikipedia, and they did not have, much to my chagrin, they did not have iPhones to take pictures.
And worst of all, they did not have internet porn. How sad. How terrible.
Well, Exactly. You've hit the nail on the you-know-what.
Yes, I have the long and hard head. But you know, Ivor Davis, in your early weeks at the London Daily Express, were you covering Peter Sellers?
Yes, I was covering Peter Sellers, who actually was, I don't know if you know this, Rabbi, but there was a certain Jewishness to him.
Yes.
So, although he was inclined to date non-Jewish girls, there's another phrase that I won't use because it may offend everybody in Colorado, but he liked to go out with blonde girls.
You mean shixes?
One of the blonde girls he went out with was called Britt Eklund, who was much younger than he was, and one day Peter, who was much older than Britt, had a heart attack, and they said it was caused by too much physical activity with his wife. I mean, this is probably more detailed than you actually want.
Oh, no, I love these details. Please, continue.
So Peter was rushed to hospital. Fortunately, he survived. So did his wife. And I covered that exciting story. And from then on, I was the choice of the foreign editor to become their foreign correspondent. And those are the kind of stories you have to cover to become a famous foreign correspondent.
Well, actually, but you know, Peter Sellers was one way on film and was a very strange, occasionally difficult man off film. How close did you get to him, and what are some anecdotes you have about him before dealing with that accident?
The thing is about Peter Sellers, that he did grow up in London. He was a brilliant man. He was, he was kind of like a forerunner of Robin Williams.
Okay.
And Jonathan Winters. He had a brilliant brain, and when you asked him a question, he could go into an impersonation and into odd voices, and that's the way he did it. The problem with Peter Sellers was when you got to Peter Sellers, he wasn't terribly interesting. He was great when he got into the Goon show, the Neddy C. Goon. I don't know if it's probably going too far back, the Goon show, but the Goon show was a brilliant, wacky comedy show in England that was popular, and Peter Sellers was the mainstay of this radio show with a bunch of other fellows. So what I'm saying about Peter Sellers was that he was pretty eccentric himself, and I always remember that I asked him about his Jewishness in an interview, and he didn't want to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
The same with Danny Kaye, who I interviewed once.
Well, I heard Danny Kaye was a bastard. Danny Kaye did some... I mean, maybe he was very nice to some people, but there were all sorts of stories of, like, when he was in that Broadway show 2x2, and he was trying to ruin the thing, and he was not a nice man. Is that what you got the sense of?
You know, he was also a brilliant talent. But let me tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
I went to see him at CBS City near the Fairfax area, which is, I believe, fairly Jewish in Los Angeles.
I love these Jewish areas.
It had nothing to do with the interview, but I went along there, and he kept me waiting for about 45 minutes to an hour. When he finally, when I was finally ushered into his dressing room, he said he apologized for keeping me waiting and then berated the poor public relations guy, saying, "Why didn't you tell me Mr. Davis was waiting?" Of course, that was a load of old rubbish. He knew he was waiting, and he just took it out on the poor PR flack. I remember that because I know that's the way Danny Kaye was. I mean, a brilliantly talented genius of a comedian, but sometimes as a human being, lacking.
Oh, well, you can say that about me pretty much every day of the year, unfortunately. But
even on the high holy days, are you that way?
Oh, I'm the worst of the... I'm hungry. I'm hungry and I have bad breath. You don't want to be near me on Yom Kippur. Or Purim or Groundhog Day for some reason. Yes.
Yes, I mean, I think that's what happens on Yom Kippur, particularly when the food is not available. However, I'm sure you have very many tricks and techniques to overcome bad breath.
No, not I just wear a handkerchief over my head. It's all I can really do. And do you have this in England, by the way, on Yom Kippur? Here in some of the synagogues, I do not do this, but they turn Yom Kippur from 24 hours, which is more than enough, to 25, just to make sure they get the whole sundown in there. So you're not just waiting a day. You're waiting a day and an hour to have a little herring and a piece of bread. Do you guys do this over there?
They actually do that. Now, I grew up in the conservative synagogue, so they made it even worse because the women were hidden away in the balcony, so you didn't have anything to look at. So not only did you not have the women to look at, you were starving, your stomach was rumbling, and then what can you do except manage to
although after 22 hours, some of the men start kissing. It's really disturbing.
I never saw that. I did see them dancing Simchat Torah, but never kissing.
Let me ask you, wait, you grew up conservative, but the separation of the women and the men, that's Orthodox. Are you sure you're talking about the right...
Well, sometimes they call it... There are different levels of conservatism. The level that I grew up in was Orthodox conservatism. Exactly that. Separation. Do not see... a naked shoulder is verboten.
Oh my gosh.
Verboten.
Wow. That's just a naked shoulder. But what if the rest of her is...
Well, we were not allowed to look at the rest of her.
Oh boy, I don't... I like my religion a lot more than... Oh, wait, you're Jewish, too.
Yes. And you didn't want to look at the rest of her because after Yom Kippur, you do want to start the day with a sin, did you?
No, I guess not. That's why I start the night before. As soon as I have that first bite of food, I'm sinning. Any possible way I can. Just to build up stuff to atone for the next year.
Exactly. You need a little build-up, don't you?
Now we've been giving a build-up here to the career of Ivor Davis, the writer, the journalist, the author of The Beatles, and me on tour. So now they tell you at this newspaper, go. The Beatles are going to be in San Francisco. What did they tell you, and what did you have to do?
So I showed up in San Francisco. I fought my way through hundreds of screaming women. I wondered what was going on. And they, first of all, didn't let me in. And then when I said I'm with the Beatles, that was the magic word. They let me in. I went up to the Beatles. I was introduced to them by their press agent, Derek Taylor. And from then on, we became friends. The first reception by the Beatles was not the most warm. They were all jet-lagged, and they couldn't care less. They couldn't have bothered an iota, even if I'd been an emissary from the Queen of England. They were jet-lagged, and when you're jet-lagged, when you're a jet... how does that song go again? And when you're
jet-lagged all the way from the top of your head, and you start to sway.
That's the one. That was from that was a Chaim Potok song from the Broadway musical, wasn't it?
It was East Side Story. Did you know that West Side Story, by the way, was supposed to be about Jews?
I heard that, and they decided to make it not about Jews, and in fact that was probably a good one because. I don't know whether Jews carried flick knives in those days, but it wouldn't have worked.
Well, and imagine if Stephen Sondheim had to write a song, instead of Maria, Shulamit, I just met a girl named Shulamit. Suddenly, it would not work.
It does not have the same incantation, whatever that means.
No, I'm a cantor too, and I don't understand what incantation.
You don't know what that is. Okay, yes, well, there it is. And then Natalie Wood was a Jewish girl, but she could have played both roles with a name like Natalie, but that's not. And Lenny Bernstein, I think he was Jewish.
Oh, certainly.
There it is.
What Natalie Wood was? I thought she was not. She was?
Well, she was Russian. With maybe a flavor of Jewish somewhere along the way, I believe.
They asked her to swim, and Natalie wouldn't. I'm kidding. That's terrible.
That wasn't a great one, but carry on.
I am carry. Oh, an English little pun there. Carry on. I'll do the Carry On series with you. But I'm sorry. I don't know what that means. The Beatles. All right. After the first press conference, you were still. It wasn't like just go meet them, write a story, and then go home. You were literally
the fun was, Rabbi, that what I kept doing was I had to write George Harrison's column because George Harrison was not a writer. He played the guitar, he sang fairly well, and I had to write his ghostwrite his column, which I did, and so that gave me an inside track to the Beatles, and from then on I was on the inside track.
And that meant every time they were on a plane or a bus or anything, you were there?
I was there. I was dogging them, and we used to play. We used to play cards, pinochle. Oh no, not pinochle.
I think Monopoly. You wrote. John Lennon was really into that.
It wasn't pinochle. I'm sorry, they didn't know how to play pinochle. Was it pinochle? I don't know. Anyway, Monopoly with John Lennon at 2 a.m, and then that was followed by games of poker, in which I removed several shekels from his pocket because I was a better poker player than him.
Oh. Now, let me ask, how often did you have to write about this?
Pretty pretty well every day. I wrote a story a day, and I wrote George's column, and we would, write about what happened. We were bombarded with candies and with shoes. Somebody in Chicago threw a steak at the Beatles. It missed the Beatles, fortunately.
A steak? You mean a physical, like a cow?
It was not a kosher steak, I'm sure. Because the Beatles were not kosher, by the way.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, this is...
Sorry. Although Brian Epstein, the manager, was kosher.
Really? I know he was Jewish, of course, but I didn't know he was kosher. That's interesting.
He was kosher, and in fact, Rabbi, you would be fascinated by this, because we were in New Orleans the day before Yom Kippur, and Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, was born on Yom Kippur. And so he called me into his suite and said, Ivor, can you get me a ticket to the local shul? I want to go to shul on Yom Kippur. So this is a true story.
Yeah.
And so I called the local Orthodox conservative temple in New Orleans. I got tickets in my name, not his name. And the next morning I called Brian and said, let's go. But there was no reply. And he actually stood me up.
Wow.
And never went to shul with me. But that's a true story. And Brian was Jewish, but not outwardly, because Jews in England at the time were, it wasn't kosher to be Jewish. I mean, that sounds silly, but that was the truth. And Brian hid his Jewishness and hid his homosexuality, of course, from the public.
Well, yeah, I mean, but by 64, I would figure, you keep mentioning that these areas that people were coming from were Jewish areas in London, and it was well known. So I'm surprised there was still that level of anti-Semitism that late into the 63, 64 era. But I guess...
There was. There was indeed. Excuse me, sure. I've got a Jewish frog in my throat. Yes.
That's Fardeya, yeah.
It was still there, and believe me, Mr. Epstein kept it fairly quiet. And John Lennon used to take the mickey, as we used to say, satirize Brian for his gayness and his Jewishness. And in fact, there's one story that I have in my book, The Beatles and Me on Tour, that is true. And I'm going to tell it to you, if I may, Rabbi.
Well, I hope the whole book is true, not just this one story, but yes, please.
That's one story, one of the true stories in the book.
Yeah.
So here's what happened. So we were sitting around having a drink, and Brian had written his autobiography. And John said to him, what's it called? And he said, it's called A Cellar Full of Noise. And John Lennon shouted back, how about calling it A Cellar Full of Boys?
That's cute.
And then Brian Epstein, getting in the mood of things, said, how about A Cellar Full of Goys? Which probably wasn't funny to Brian, but at the same time, the two of them used to josh each other around about many things. Good day. This is Ivor Davis, the author of The Beatles and Me on Tour, an exciting cliff-hanging adventure of my travels with the Beatles, the lads from Liverpool, talking to Rabbi Sol Solomon of Dave's Gone By, UNC Radio.
How old are you?
Well, I'm older than you. I was going to say an anorexic 67, a dyslexic 67.
Oh, so you're not, we think of everything going back to that time as already being so old, but you're not even 80 yet. You're 76. That's not so old.
Exactly. I mean, what was that last age you mentioned? 80?
Well, you made it past when you're 64, so that's important too.
I am. I was relieved to pass that, yes.
Here, speaking of which, of getting older and all that, which is the Beatle that you have seen or talked to most recently?
Well, the most recent one I spoke to was Ringo, because Ringo came to California, where I live, because they had an exhibit of his memorabilia at the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
And Ringo said to me that he never knew all the stuff that was in the museum was available. And he said what happened was his mother died several years ago, and when they looked in the attic, they found every single piece of literature and souvenirs that he'd sent to her, she'd kept. Wow. And there was so much stuff there that they were able to put a little exhibit on in the museum, the Grammy Museum in L.A., and that's when I last saw Ringo. And then about 6 weeks ago, Ringo and his all-star band came to the Santa Barbara Bowl and performed, and I went there to see him sing dance and play the drums.
So this is just like 6 weeks ago from today. So you went, but you didn't meet him backstage after. They didn't get to talk to him.
No, I didn't, because I went backstage and there were 279 people lined up to go backstage, and I decided to go home.
Sure, of course. But I mean, do you keep in touch in any other way? Do you correspond? Do you email? Do you ever, or is it just like?
Not particularly. Funnily enough, I just got an email because of my book, which did I mention was called The Beatles and Me on Tour? Anyway, because of my book, I got a message, a note from Paul McCartney's stepmother, who wanted to meet me. She lives in California, and we're going to the Beatles Fan Fest in Los Angeles in October. So it's funny, a lot of people who I never knew existed or weren't around have contacted me since the book has been getting a little bit of publicity.
Well, that's why his stepmother, now she must be older than 76.
She is. She's 83, and she does a thing called the Magical History Tour instead of the Magical Mystery Tour. I'm not sure what that's all about, but it's something to do with Liverpool and the roots of the Beatles and all that sort of stuff. So everybody from the family is cashing in on the family. Well,
do you ever, with this book, do you feel like you're cashing in a little bit on, your history with them and what your piece of their story, which only lasted, a month and a half, really?
Exactly. Well, the funny thing is that I was never inclined to write anything, and then every time I spoke to people, whether it was a dinner party or at a cocktail party, they were absolutely riveted when I told them I traveled with the Beatles.
Sure.
So finally, I decided to write my story. This is my story about that group. It just happened to be the Beatles, which was a fluke. So in a way, I'm cashing in on my own memories, but at the same time bringing in these four mop-top guys who have turned into a multi-billion-dollar industry. So it's a bit of, I guess I am cashing in. Yeah, that's the answer.
All you need is cash, as the Ruttles would say.
But I want to tell you that I'm doing a benefit for our temple in Ventura, California, Temple Beth Torah, in which I will speak, tell Jewish stories, and maybe you could be the master of the ceremonies, Rabbi, long distance by satellite.
Oh, I could Skype my way through, because I dated Beth Dora. She was a nice girl.
What sort of woman was she?
Her maiden name was Beth Kimmel, but she changed it to Beth Dora. She was very nice.
Yes, I'm glad. I'm glad that you have romance in your life.
No, she didn't put out, but she was very nice. Actually.
Okay.
Now, we're speaking with Ivor Davis and his memories, and they are, if nothing else, this book is filled with details. I'm assuming you kept incredibly detailed diaries and journals of every day, because I had to write that column. So,
first of all, I used to write everything on the back of my hand, and then after 4 years I took a shower, and that was gone. However, where I was very lucky, Rabbi, was that I was able to go back to England, go into the archives of the newspaper, to all the stories and columns I wrote. I was also able to talk to several surviving members of the tour, radio guys, another journalist who lives in the south of France, another guy that lives in New Mexico, another photographer that lives in New York. And by the time I cobbled it all together, the book was born.
So it's not as if you really remember every single night what they ate, what they did, whether they swan about the hotel or they were, having girls or something, but you were able to piece that from everything, because you couldn't put a lot of things they were doing in your columns, that's for sure.
That is exactly so, because if I've written about the girls and the women and a few of the other things, I think it would have come back to haunt me and they would have thrown me off the plane. So I wrote a fairly tepid, whichever you prefer, series of columns and stories, and when I started rereading them recently, they were pretty boring. So I was a pretty awful writer in those days. I'm slightly better than awful right now.
Well, but now again, you can tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Exactly.
You don't have to say what they are, because are there still things that you left out of the book because you felt they were just, even now, a little too embarrassing or too mean or too...
Well, except for the sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the sort of the Jewish stuff, most of the stuff is in the book. But no, seriously, though, Rabbi. I put most of the stuff in. I mean, you have to clean it up for, you have a sort of a GP audience. Is it GP or GM or what?
PG here.
PG, sorry.
Yeah. My audience is triple X rated with an NC-17 on top of it. So go ahead. Is there something really filthy that?
Here's one of the things that would appeal to your basic instincts here.
Yes.
Now, Derek Taylor was a very nice guy, a journalist who used to work for my newspaper, who became the press secretary and Brian Epstein's personal assistant.
And he was the one who forged all the autographs, right?
He did. He was the forger. He was a great forger. He could have a conversation in one hand and a brandy in the other, and then in the other hand he would forge the signatures of the Beatles very well. It was brilliant, actually. But he said to me this, which you would appreciate. He said that Brian Epstein got these greasy kids from Hamburg, greasy kids in leather jackets, and he changed the boys into the clean-cut lads who he could take home to introduce to his Jewish mother for afternoon tea.
Right.
And that was his goal, and he did it. He did it, and they were clean-cut lads back then. Today, well, that's another story.
Right, but even in the book, you say, as clean-cut as they were. I mean, they would go to parties, they would nod at some girl that they liked, and they expect that Derek or somebody would get that girl to their hotel later on.
Well, Rabbi, think back to when you were in your early 20s. I mean, I presume you had a healthy libido. Now that you're an old man and an old rabbi, or maybe you're not so old, but middle-aged.
Middle-aged, okay.
In the 20s, you were a guy who knew a beautiful woman when he saw one.
Oh, hell yeah!
Right? Am I right?
Oh, please, my mezuzah has a thermometer on it. The hotter the girl, the redder the mezuzah turns.
I've seen those. Can you send me one of those mezuzahs with a thermometer?
Well, if you have any memorabilia to trade, I sure will.
Okay, well, I'll send you an old yellowed clipping of my column, and you send me the mezuzah with a thermometer.
I think that's a fair deal. Okay, I'll have to start building one tonight. But okay, so yes, I would see a girl, but being shy and Jewish and whatever, I might have the courage to go up and talk to the girl. Maybe I wouldn't expect to be stooping that girl 7 hours later in the middle of a Holiday Inn.
But if you went up close and sang them, I want to hold your yarmulke, you would get away with it, wouldn't you?
Well, I guess that's true. But they also used to get hookers on the road and things like that.
Well, they did actually in Atlantic City. What actually happened was that we went to Atlantic City. The concert was a great success. The promoter thought he would reward the boys with a screening of the movie that they were in. We all showed up in the suite, top floor suite at the hotel off the boardwalk or whatever they call the place in Atlantic City, and he showed the movie. But before he showed the movie, he trotted in 7 or 8 rather attractive young women who were not Beatles fans in that way, and he actually said to them, and I was there, he said to them, well, take your pick. Well, for the Beatles studied very hard for about 7 seconds, and they took their pick.
Wow.
They went, and, they missed the movie. But when they came back, I said to them, you missed the movie. Don't you feel bad about it? And they said, we've seen the movie.
Yes. I don't think they feel bad about missing the movie at all.
No,
they could rent it on DVD.
And here's another kind of Jewish insider. So throughout the tour, Paul McCartney used to say, when they asked him, what's your favorite rock group, he used to reply, Sophie Tucker. Okay. And a lot of people thought, is Sophie Tucker a variation, an American variation on the Rolling Stones? Now, you may be too young for this, but Sophie Tucker...
I know. Well, yeah, I know who Sophie Tucker is, but tell our audience, yes.
Well, she was a kind of, how shall I put it, a rather mature Jewish lady who sang bawdy songs, but her big hit was that song that almost knocked I Want to Hold Your Hand off the hit parade, My Yiddish Mama.
Right.
It climbed very high, but it never quite made it to the top.
So, in other words, when he was saying Sophie Tucker, it wasn't just a complete joke.
It was his joke. It was his joke because he'd met Sophie Tucker 7 months earlier at the Royal Command Performance Royal Command Performance Theatre performance. He met her, and he rather liked her. And then they were going to go on tour together. No, I just made that up, sorry. Anyway, so he used that as a joke, and a lot of people thought, who the hell is Sophie Tucker?
And actually someone that we do know, and another journalist, and I meant to bring this up because, believe it or not, you are the second person that has been on this radio program that was there when the Beatles first tried marijuana. And they met Bob Dylan.
Okay, well, who was the other one?
Well, it was the late journalist Al Aronowitz was actually on this radio program.
Let me ask you a question, Rabbi.
Okay.
Now, Al Aronowitz wrote some brilliant stories about the Beatles for the Saturday Evening Post, and the Beatles liked him very much because he also was somewhat irreverent. Now, as he grew a little bit older, some of us went to cornflakes, and Al Aronowitz went to other stimulants.
Right.
And cornflakes. And as a result, his memory got a little bit, how shall I say, there's a good Irish word called famished. You may be familiar with that.
I do.
So Al Aronowitz was a bit famished in the brain, and he told the story of him personally giving the Beatles and Bob Dylan marijuana. However, I was there when Bob Dylan came along without Al Aronowitz and gave them marijuana at the Idlewild Motor Hotel a day before they went back to England at the end of the tour. So that's my version of the story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. So wait. But that would have been before or after. So you were there the time that all four or all six of you were there. Was it after or before?
Yeah, well, Al's story, as told by Al, from what I see, was that he went along with Dylan and somebody else to the Delmonico Hotel in New York, where they all got potted or stoned or whatever the phrase is. However, it never happened at the Delmonico. I think Al might have been a bit forgetful. Because I know that I was there when Dylan showed up. I saw Dylan walking into the hotel, and he looked like somebody who would strip a hen house. A very sort of unsavory-looking character.
I never heard that. He looked like he would strip a hen house.
Yeah, the fox raids the hen house, and somebody goes along to the chicken coop and steals all the chickens.
And he looks like he would be...
That was what Bob Dylan looked like, one of those unsavory, rather suspicious-looking characters that if he showed up in your hotel, you'd call the house detective.
I guess that was the only time you ever met or dealt with or talked to Bob Dylan.
Yes, but Bob Dylan came in, and he came in looking with a backpack, looking a bit grubby, trying to show as if he was the midnight shift at the hotel. He did not want to be identified, and I did meet Bob Dylan again in Malibu, California, and it's a long story which I won't go into now, but he was building a monstrosity of a house in Malibu.
Oh, the dome place, right?
Pardon?
The dome? The one with the dome on it?
Yeah, in Point Doom, Malibu. And I went along there, I'd done a story, I wrote a magazine story, and as I was sitting outside, a guy comes along in the Jeep, and it was Dylan. And so I pretended I didn't know it was Dylan, and he pretended he wasn't Dylan. We had a funny conversation about the house.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right.
Yeah.
Any other encounters with... Because it also interests me, this book is about what happened literally 50 years ago. September 20th was the last Beatles date in America on that tour. What have you been doing since?
Well,
for the past 50 years.
I've been living my life. I got married. I had 2 children. I had a gorgeous daughter named Rebecca and a good-looking son named Gideon. And because I am of the Jewish persuasion, I named them that way.
Oh, yeah.
I just went through the Bible and found the names, and boom, that was it. And then I've been raising my kids, and then they have their own kids, also wonderful biblical names, Sadie, Elias, Levi.
Oh, my God.
Well, so we have a biblical family. I feel a bit like Moses, if Moses had gone on to have a family. Anyway.
But also in the work world, you, a few years later, after the Beatles stuff, you wrote 5 years before Helter Skelter. You wrote the first book about the whole Charles Manson thing.
I did, and the reason I did was that I got caught up in that case, and I went along to the Spahn Ranch, which is a seedy old western cowboy ranch on the edge of L.A., and there I met all these young girls and boys who had not been arrested with Manson, and Manson had been arrested, and I said to them, tell me, what's life like here? And they spun this incredible story about Charles Manson and how he brainwashed everyone. And then I quickly wrote a book about it, which much later Vincent Bugliosi, who was the district attorney prosecuting the case, used, I was told, as the blueprint for his prosecution. Of course, I never got paid for that, but there it is. You go through life and sometimes you get paid and sometimes you don't.
And you also, I think you billed the book as the book that helped convict Charles Manson, because Bugliosi was the prosecuting attorney. So he was able to use elements of your book, not just to write his book, but more importantly to make sure that this guy's still in jail.
Exactly. I mean, what actually happened was, just to set it in time, was I wrote the book in 1960, whatever it was, 67, or I forget the year now, before the trial began. And that's the blueprint. And then about 5 years ago, I updated my book and brought in a lot of stuff I couldn't put in at the time, and wrote a new book, which was the one that you referred to, the book that helped convict Manson. So that was because I learned from the other district attorney that they used my book as the blueprint.
I got it. Now, what about, have you written other books? Ivor Davis?
Really, I mean, I did a book, contributed the book with the London Daily Express about the American political scene, about in the 80s, I traveled with Ronald Reagan and traveled with Bobby Kennedy.
That's right. Oh, that's right. You were in the same hotel on the same night that he got shot, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, Bobby Kennedy had just finished a speech. He'd won California, and he was just leaving and out of the back door, and we were following him because I'd been on the trail with him covering his campaign, and I heard balloons popping, and I thought there were balloons popping, then I heard screaming, so I rushed to the edge of the kitchen to the door, and there, lying on the floor, cradled in the arms of Ethel Kennedy, was Bobby Kennedy, and that picture, that memory, that scene was forever etched on my memory, because we were shocked and stunned. And of course, we went to the hospital. They said he was holding his own. We were there until the middle of the night, and then about 3 or 4 in the morning, they announced that Bobby Kennedy was dead.
Did you have any thoughts or things? When we were covering Bobby Kennedy, you were supposed to be an objective journalist, but did you consider yourself left-leaning, right-leaning? Were you just covering him objectively, or did you believe in him as a politician? What?
I believed in him. I mean, I have been a lifelong Democrat, and I'm not about to change my stripes. But anyway, I think a lot of journalists, as some of the right-wing media have depicted, a lot of the journalists are a little bit democratic or not left-leaning, but certainly inclined to be more liberal than the conservatives. So the long-winded answer to your question, Rabbi, is that I liked him. He was a good speaker, a very energetic speaker. Of course, he reminded people of John, and he would have gone on to greatness except for this Sirhan who shot him.
Well, now let me ask, you're a lifelong Democrat, won't change your stripes, believed in that cause, and really felt that way about Kennedy, but for whatever you felt about him otherwise, Ronald Reagan was a tremendously charismatic leader. Did you find yourself being taken into his camp during the Reagan years, since you were on the bus with him?
Well, strangely enough, I was on the bus with Reagan, first of all, when he became governor, and secondly, when he became president. Now, the interesting thing about Reagan was, he was, as I like to term that great Irish expression, a great schmoozer. And he would very easily come down the boys on the plane bus, and he would talk to us all. He would schmooze with us. He was very comfortable with people, and very likable guy. But to be honest with you, I this is not a political show, Rabbi, but I didn't think he was a great president. I think he was basically directed to do what everybody around him wanted him to do. Now there are people I've spoken to who say he's the greatest American president. I think, frankly, that's bosh.
Of course, yeah.
You didn't get me on your show, Rabbi, to talk politics. So he was a great guy, Reagan, a very amicable, gregarious fellow. And
it just occurs to me that three people that you knew on some level closely, three very big public figures, were shot. I think you're bad luck in some ways.
Yeah, well, I think if I go back on in a time warp, maybe instead of going with the Beatles, I'll go with the Rolling Stones, and then the whole story would change, and that could be a movie of the week.
Well, no, if you had been with the Rolling Stones, Altamont, somebody would have shot Jagger, and then where would we be?
Exactly.
Now, do you remember? But in a more serious vein, do you remember where you were, how you felt when you heard in 1980, I think it was, that John Lennon was killed?
Believe it or not, I can't remember where I was, but I know that I was absolutely staggered. But a strange thing, when I traveled with John in 1964, he was sort of preoccupied with the fact that Americans were killing each other. He was the most political of the Beatles. He was the one that read the newspapers. He was the one that said, we are not going to play in Jacksonville if they segregate the audience. John was the political conscience of the Beatles. And so when he died, it was eerie because he worried about people killing each other with guns in America, and he fell victim to just that.
And when you say worried about people, we're talking about literally on tour in 1964. He was worried about it.
He was worried about that because there was front-page stories about civil rights protesters being attacked, police in the Deep South setting dogs onto the protesters, and he was very upset by those front-page stories.
And let's not forget the Beatles' first...
shooting.
Yeah, the Beatles' first...
Kennedy.
No, exactly. It was a week after Kennedy got shot that the Beatles were doing something very big or making their first appearance in America or something like that. So it was very connected. They were the thing that woke America out of its mourning period, in a way.
I think there's a certain amount of truth to that, Rabbi, but let me just say one thing.
Sure.
It sounds very plausible, and maybe there was some partial truth to that. But don't forget, the Beatles appealed to young women of the ripe old age of 13, 14, 15, and 16. And with all due respect to those young women, the effect of John Kennedy being assassinated did not probably impact them as much as it did the older parents. So I'm not so sure that thesis works, but you can use it if you like.
Oh, that's interesting, because the older people, the people in their late teens and 20s, didn't really gravitate towards the Beatles until probably 65, 66, when they conquered the radio. That's a really interesting thought. Huh.
Because I think the 12 and 13, 14-year-olds knew that John Kennedy had been shot in Dallas, but I think the impact, the emotional impact, probably wasn't quite as powerful as it was on us older folk.
Well, think about, like, just about a week and a half ago, we went through the 13th anniversary of 9/11.
Yes.
And my friend Dave, he lives around the college campus, and he actually teaches at the university where this radio program emerges from. Sorry about the grammar there. But he realized when he was teaching these people, he was going to think about saying something about 9/11. And he realized these kids were 5, 6 years old when it happened. It means nothing to them. It's like Pearl Harbor Day. It's like first shot of the Civil War. It's just a day.
Not a bad comparison in a way. John Kennedy to the kids and 9/11 to the kids. I mean, I think we were all, it depends how old we were, but with 9/11, I think we all know exactly when we heard about it.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, so indeed, the Beatle comparison to that whole thesis may not quite hold water.
Okay, that's totally fair. And believe me, at my age, I can't hold water either.
I know, but you can go to the urologist and he will help.
Oh yeah. He usually gives me the finger, but in a good way. Anywho...
Well, we could go into detail there, but is this
No,
a medical show?
Let's not go into that. But
Okay.
have a couple more quick questions for the delightful, the funny, and the marvelous Ivor Davis. He's the author of The Beatles and Me on Tour, also the author of Five to Die, the book that convicted Manson. That's the rewrite, the expanded version that he did of the original book. How can, first of all, people get a hold of these books? Do you have a website?
Yes, I do have a website. I'm glad you asked. Now, if you want my Beatle book, you go to www.ivor, and that's spelled I-V-O-R, not Igor, I-V-O-R, davisbeatles.com. And there on the website, you will see my picture as a young man, and you will see more than you ever wanted to know about Ivor Davis and the Beatles. But the most important thing is you can buy the book on the website.
Right, and it's a you can buy a hard copy book. And are there ebooks? Can you download it too and do all that sort
And
of?
you can definitely buy ebooks. I'm told that it's better to buy hardback and softback, but ebooks will do as well. And so as a result of the royalties of the book selling, I will be able to give a bigger donation these coming high holy days at my local temple.
Hey, can I ask you, of all, what are the one or two favorite nights, Beatle memories of that 1964 tour for you?
Well, there was one I say favorite memories. One of the weirdest memories was going to a nightclub with the Beatles, who had been seduced by a rather statuesque actress by the name of Jane Mansfield. Just came knocking at their door, wanted to have a picture taken with them, fancied the Beatles, John fancied her, so she dragged them to the Whiskey A Go-Go nightclub for a quiet evening of drinking and watching Johnny Rivers perform. However, the paparazzi showed up. One photographer got a little too close. George was getting drunk. He picked up his drink, threw it at the photographer, missed the photographer, hit Mamie Van Doren, another statuesque Hollywood woman. All hell broke loose. The Beatles made a quick getaway, and it was a disastrous evening out for them because they never went out much. So that was kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
And then there were so many other little incidents. But don't forget, Rabbi, the boys were trapped in their hotel. They couldn't go anywhere. The only entertainment they got were card games with us, me, some of the radio guys, the photographers. If they stepped outside their room, it would have been at their peril. They could not do that. And so it was a very close quarters thing. And the other fun story, I must tell you, involves celebrities, is in the middle of the tour in Hollywood, the Capitol Records boss put on a garden party for charity. The Beatles sat on high chairs in the garden, and every big star in Hollywood came along with their sons, daughters, grandchildren to have a picture taken with the Beatles. And the Beatles did it for charity. And Edward G. Robinson, Lancaster, a lot of people, a lot of Groucho Marx showed up to meet the Beatles. And that was a fascinating little exercise in Hollywood Meets the Beatles.
Oh, and you were there for that. I wish you had your camera. Yeah.
Remember it vividly, yes.
Wow. By the way, what is your favorite piece of memorabilia? I think you mentioned in the book that you gave pretty much all of it away. But is there stuff you kept that you treasure?
Well, the only thing I treasure at the moment are pictures of my grandchildren.
Oh, okay.
To answer your question, I'm sorry, that was a bit schmoozy, I know.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Anyway.
Shame on you, yes.
I never kept anything. About 10 years ago, before I thought of writing the book, I found some of my hotel bills from New York, and a room, the Delmonico, back in '64 was about $17 a night. But I thought, who wants this rubbish? I threw it away. I had thrown away most of my stuff, and also the autographs I gave away. So all I've got is my memories and a framed copy of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album cover.
A framed copy, not even signed by them, just a framed copy.
Not signed by them. One of those cheapo things that I must have picked up. However, I do have a fantastic collection of Beatle books that I'm sure my children will then sell for enormous amounts of money when I'm gone.
which is hopefully many, many years away. By the way, speaking of, you were mentioning your own yellow dog-eared columns that you were going to trade for my mezuzah. Speaking of yellow pages and dog-eared, tell us about the suitcase. Briefcase, I should say. Briefcase.
The briefcase. Oh, yes. Now, I knew that Brian Epstein had got the Beatles under a very tough timetable to write music for the upcoming albums, which he'd committed to the record companies. But the Beatles had to write the music, and the only people really writing music then were John and Paul. And a couple of times I burst into the suite to try and scrounge a free drink, which I was very much inclined to do in those days. I now pay for my own drinks. And one day I went in there, and there was John and Paul lying sort of on the floor like it was like a frat house, with a battered old briefcase and exercise book paper lying all over the place. And they were actually writing music that way, and they kept their music in this old brown briefcase that either Paul took with him or Neil, the road manager, carried with him. And that was kind of the keeper of their music, because they had to deliver. And that was the first time I'd seen the Beatles writing music in action, if you like. John said he used to whistle songs, Paul said he hummed them, but they worked in a very different way. But they turned out, as you know, quite an array of music.
And I think that leads us to our final question with the marvelous Ivor Davis, the fellow who wrote the Beatles and Me on Tour. And remember, it's IvorDavisBeagles.com. What was it? IvorDavisBeaglesOnTour.com?
Yeah, just IvorDavisBeatles.com.
IvorDavisBeagles.com.
www.IvorDavisBeatles.com for everything you need to know, and buy the book.
Now, what is your favorite all-time Beatles song, Ivor Davis?
Well, believe it or not,
what?
I'm going to say I like Long Tall Sally, which the Beatles didn't write. But seriously,
No, they used to have to
finish. My wife's name was Sally, and that was a good one. But the later ones that I liked, I mean, I think Yesterday is a great one. Let It Be. I mean, I like Hey Jude. Everybody I've met on the road while I've been promoting this book comes up with a different Beatles song,
sure,
different Beatles story. It's amazing the diversity of ages that have been touched and loved the Beatles, including you, Rabbi, right?
Oh, I'm a huge fan. My only regret about them is that none of them is Jewish. Always made me a little bit sad.
Well, let me just tell you that, well, I was going to say Paul was Jewish by injection, but not quite. If you know what I mean, first of all...
Wait. Was Jane Asher Jewish or was Linda? Who was Jewish?
Linda was Jewish.
Linda Eastman was Jewish?
Yes. Yes. And she was, and so is the current wife, Nancy Chevelle, who comes from a nice, wealthy Jewish family in New York.
Oh my God! Maybe, Gwyneth Paltrow is now converting to Judaism. You know this, right?
Yes. Well, I knew. I mean, I think Gwyneth's father was Jewish. But
yes, Bruce Paltrow, but she was not Jewish on Blythe Danner's side. So now she's so maybe Nancy Chevelle will bring him to the tribe. Maybe. I don't know.
Let me tell you. I've got a quick story to finish with. I know you're running out of time. I did a recent event in Malibu for the Malibu Malibu Film Society, which is being held in the Malibu Synagogue.
Uh-huh.
And they asked me if I would bring Paul along to a screening of A Hard Day's Night. And I said, the problem is, number one, Paul is very busy, but number two, since he married a Jewish woman, every time he shows up in shul, the rabbi asks him for a donation.
And they probably do.
A stained glass window.
Yeah.
So he's quit going to shul, to different shuls around the country. He goes to a shul in London, a liberal reform synagogue.
Wait, you're not joking about this? Nancy Chevelle is Jewish enough that she actually attends synagogue and he goes with her?
Rabbi, he went earlier this year to the Reform Synagogue in St. John's Wood, London, where the rabbi gave him a special blessing for their new marriage.
Oh I'm so happy. This is.
I knew that would make your day, and it would make any Shabbat Shalom day.
No. You know what made my day, Ivor Davis? Talking to you, because you are so fun and so smart and so have so many wonderful stories. It has been an absolute simcha and delight. I wish you wonderful Jewish holidays, a happy Jewish New Year, many more years. Last question for you. What, if you can say, because a lot of writers don't like to talk before it's finished, but what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on, believe it or not, a murder book of a friend of mine who turned out to be a murderer.
Oh my! Whoa! What the hell? What?
Yeah. So it's.
So you know 4 shooters now. What happened?
But he's not Jewish.
Okay, thank God.
Does that matter? Can we still talk about it? Yeah.
Well, no. I'm glad he's not. This guy. I'm glad he's not Jewish. What the hell?
So there's one murder book, and believe it or not, are you ready for this? I am 2/3 of the way through a book, and it's called this: 99 Jewish movies you must see, and 10 you should avoid like the plague.
I think I know where the jazz singer is landing. I mean, the remake with Neil Diamond.
Yes, you know where the remake is, because you know how wonderful the great actor Laurence Olivier was as the rabbi. I mean, Laurence Olivier is a great actor, but as a rabbi, he's not good.
He was pretty good as a Nazi, but as a rabbi, not so much.
Nazi, yeah. In The Marathon Man, he was a nasty Nazi. and you wouldn't want him to fix your teeth, would you?
Actually, is there any other kind of Nazi?
Well, that's true.
And we didn't even get to talk about the fact that you grew up in London kind of during the Blitz. And you know what? When your next book is, let's get you back on the air. We'll talk a little bit more. I would really love to do that.
Love to. Gay Gesint is what they say in Dublin.
Gay Gesint, yes, with much mazel and gesund to Ivor Davis. Thank you again for being in the neighborhood, and shalom to you.
Shalom.